نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى في شان حبيبي إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأحوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات إنك على كل شيء قدير. صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. Today is the 27th of Sha'ban, which obviously then means that the 29th will be Sunday, which therefore means that the first of Ramadan may either be Monday or Tuesday, depending on the sighting of the moon. Ramadan, and whenever Ramadan would come around, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would address the believers and give them the glad tidings of this month, because it's a month of blessings in which the person's risk is increased, his sustenance is increased, reward for any actions are increased. So, and every aspect of it is a blessing for the believers. The other side of Ramadan, which we see a lot of lately, is, and especially the past few years, is that whenever Ramadan comes around, the oppressiveness and the tyrannical actions of those who despise Islam, who despise the Muslims, also increases. You just look at what happens in Masjid al-Aqsa every Ramadan. Literally the worshippers are tied up, beaten, gassed, and everything else. And this is just kind of a glimpse into what is coming. We see it in one place, but just because it's just like a fire. If I light a fire in one room of the house, and I move to another room in the house and think, the fire's just in that room, nothing's going to happen to me here. Well, that's foolish thinking, and someone who thinks like that is going to get burned in the fire, because that fire spreads. That's the nature of fire. So the nature of these atrocities that happen against the believers, irregardless of whether they may seem at the moment to be in one isolated area, they spread. And when we really start analyzing things, because unfortunately we have over time become disconnected from the ummah as a whole. When we really start analyzing things throughout the Muslim world, and not just the Muslim world, throughout the world, we see that the oppression and the tyranny isn't isolated to just one area. It's everywhere. it may not be the same form of tyranny and oppression, but it is everywhere. And the worst form of tyranny is when our iman is taken away from us and we don't even realize it. This is what is happening in the Muslim countries. Where, and even in the Muslim countries, physically we're not safe. But even if we have the delusion that we are safe in those places, that delusion makes it easier for them to steal our iman. And this, again, all of this is, part of the fitna of Dajjal that we are seeing all around us. And the whole ummah is subjugated to. It's one thing when you're oppressed physically. When somebody hits me physically, I know it. And if I'm awake, in the sense not of awake or asleep, but if I'm awake spiritually, then I can respond to that attack. But when someone tries to steal my iman, but at the same time he's nice to me physically, he smiles at me, he gives me food, he does all of these things, my level of defenses become very weak because I'm not expecting it. And if I'm expecting an attack, then I can prepare myself for the attack. But when I'm not expecting the attack, then what do? And this, again, is the condition of the ummah. So much so now, because this has been the condition of the ummah for a long time. But it has progressed to the extent now that even when they attack us physically, we're still asleep. So that we see all of these things happening, and we either are so weak that even if when we realize that we can't respond, or we don't even acknowledge it. And it's interesting how they chip away at things. It's like, a simple example of this is, Saudi. They've been stealing everybody's iman for decades, literally. Actually, for a century. Literally for a century. Directly. They were doing it even before. And I'm not going to get into all of that history. But for a century, they have been in power. And they've been stealing everybody's iman. You go for Hajj, you go for Umrah, and the notion for most people, and especially for people who aren't from that area when they go, is, this is where Islam began. So these people, they know Islam better than anybody else. And you get off the plane and they ask you, what language do you speak? And they hand you a pile of books in that language. And then when you start reading through the books, especially if you're there for Hajj, they start telling you in the books that, going to Medina Munawwara is not part of Hajj. Which, the statement is true, but what they're implying by it is something different. And then they go on, tell you, you don't need to go to Medina Munawwara. And then they go on to the next step, which is, if you go to Medina Munawwara, you need to go with the intention of visiting the masjid, Because if you go with the intention of visiting the Rawda of Rasulullah or visiting Rasulullah, then you have committed shirk. And the whole purpose behind that is to separate you from your Rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so now we see all of those things that any common Muslim thinks are abominations becoming normal place there. To the extent that if you say anything against them, then you're the one who's arrested. To the extent that even if you wear colors that support people that are being oppressed, you will be arrested. I mean, you're not even saying anything. You're just wearing clothes of a certain color. So that now when Ramadan comes, you see the same rules being applied that the Soviet Union was applying upon the Muslims. You can't bring your children to the masjid. The adhan will not be called from the mic, except in the haram. So they always make that, except in the haram. The prayers will not be broadcasted on the mic. So if you have a huge masjid, which many of them are huge, then the people in the back can't hear anything in the front. And now you can't have iftar in the masjid. You can't even collect money to have iftar in the masjid. And of course they have justification for everything. There's always justification. Just like when they're killing the Muslims, there's always justification. And again, as I keep saying, when the non-Muslims are doing this, big deal. That's what I expect from them. But when those who are supposed to be guardians of the religion are doing this, then that becomes an issue. So, even though, as we said, Ramadan is this month of great blessings, where everything, all good deeds are multiplied. And we use the term 70 times, but 70 here doesn't mean 69 plus 1. 70 in these terms means, an abundance. And that also is based on our sincerity. The more sincere we are in our actions, the more things are multiplied. But when we look, at Ramadan, and of course, in the Quran, there are only 6 verses that deal with Ramadan, which is interesting. All of these 6 verses are all in one place. Verses 183 through 188 of Surah Baqarah. When you look at all the other arkan or all the other pillars of Islam, like Salat and Zakat and Hajj, you find, these things being mentioned in various places. And of course, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَإِيتَوُا الزَّكَاةَ. Make salat and pay zakat. Multiple times in the Quran. Which is also an indication that if you are particular about your salat, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you able to pay zakat. And Hajj also mentioned in different places in the Quran, to the extent that you even have a surah designated Surah Hajj. But Ramadan, again, just one place. And the verse starts off with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you believe. Kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. That, O you who believe, not addressing the non-Muslims, because this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted to this ummah. But the fasting itself is not specific to this ummah. And this is why he says that fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. So we are not the first to fast. But there are many things that are particular to this ummah as far as fasting. There are many, because of our connection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's love for this ummah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this ummah special gifts that He did not give to the previous nations, and various, and there are various of those, including that the rebellious shayateen are all chained. And of course, those are the rebellious shayateen from amongst the jinn. So those are all chained and put aside. But the nafs is still there. And the problem with most of us is that over the past 11 months, we've gotten our nafs so used to doing whatever it wants to do, then that momentum continues on through Ramadan. Because a lot of people ask, well, they say that if all of these shayateen are chained and removed, then why do people continue to sin? And as I said, the oppression upon the believers for the past several years in Ramadan increases from the outside. The flip side to that is that the reward for the patience and the perseverance of those that are being oppressed dramatically increases as well. So when we look at that verse, and of course this verse was revealed in the second year of Hijrah. Many things happened in the second year of Hijrah. The change of the Qibla, the Battle of Badr, and Battle of Badr took place in Ramadan. The obligation of fasting. So there are many things that are associated with this time frame. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He commands us to fast, and He tells us, as far as the obligation of fasting, He also tells us the purpose of fasting. And He says what? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That you may attain taqwa. And when we look at taqwa, it gets translated in a lot of ways, which, piety, righteousness, God-fearing, God-conscious. And of course, taqwa involves or envelops all of these things. When we think about Ramadan, or we think about fasting in general, many things that were halal when we weren't fasting are now haram. And the things that were halal that are now haram are those things that, if you think about it, are usually things that are natural for the person to do. Eating, drinking. These are things that many of us do without thinking anymore. And you're sitting around and just eating. And yet now, when you make that intention of fasting, those same things that were halal are now haram. Everything that was haram before is still haram. And so things that we shouldn't have been doing before, we still shouldn't be doing. And many of those things that are haram technically also break our fast, which is important to remember. And this is why we have the incident during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where you had two elderly women who were fasting, and their condition became such that they were about to die. The fasting was so hard on them that they were about to die. And the companions, they come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say, "Ya Rasulullah, so some of these women, they're about to die, they're fasting." And of course, they were expecting him to tell them to go and give them something to eat or drink. And he tells them to make them vomit. If I think about that medically, if I don't have anything in my stomach, what am I going to vomit? If there's nothing to vomit, how can you vomit? That's what they call dry heaves. You just like you're about to vomit, but nothing's moving. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, make them vomit. And of course, these are the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They know that if he said it, that's it. So they go, and they force them to vomit. Stick their hand down their throat and vomit. And what comes up? Flesh starts coming up. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains to them that these two were involved in backbiting. And backbiting, of course, he drew that analogy to eating the flesh of your brother. So they were involved in that while they were fasting. So the fast itself became very difficult for them, even though their stomach is full of the flesh of whoever they're backbiting against. Normally these are metaphysical things. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed us the practical, the actual. But coming back to the point of taqwa, again, those things that are halal when you're not fasting are now haram. And these are things that many of us do without thinking. So now, every time I'm about to drink some water, if I'm fasting, what do I think? Automatically my mind shifts and says, oh, I'm fasting. Who do we fast for? For Allah. And this is why in the Hadith of Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says more or less that fasting is for me and I am its reward. So again, you start to eat and you think again, oh, I'm fasting. So it reminds us of Allah. But again, taqwa is a very broad term. It is being conscious of Allah. It is fearing doing anything that displeases Allah. But the greatest form of taqwa that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts, that He certifies in the Quran. Because again, the purpose of fasting is to attain taqwa. In Surah Hujurat, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَغُضُّونَ أَصْوَاتَهُمْ عِنْدَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أولئك الذين امتحن الله قلوبهم للتقوى لهم مغفرة وأجر عظيم. That indeed those who lower their voices below or in front of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, truly they have attained, or truly their hearts are certified with taqwa. And for them is a great reward and forgiveness. So, the purpose of fasting is to attain taqwa. And the taqwa that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts is to humble ourselves before His beloved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that taqwa, or fasting rather, fasting should allow us to appreciate and to love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam even more. Because he is the greatest sign of Allah. And when we realize his maqam, or when we think about his maqam or his status and his essence, it should allow us to love Allah or know Allah even better. Because the lovers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never forget Allah. And those who reject or try to minimize the status of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will never know Allah. So again, fasting is around the corner. And this is time, and we still have a few days, or a couple of days literally, to prepare. So this is also time for us to mentally get ready in order to accept, to welcome the month with the attitude that we should have. But at the same time, when we are going through the fasting, part of the purpose of that is to also remember the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And not to forget the hardships that the ummah is going through. To remember them and to make dua for them and to do whatever we can for them. And this is the weakness of our iman, that the ummah is placed in a condition, or the rest of the ummah is placed in a condition where we feel handicapped. Even though there are things that we can do indirectly, but the sad part is, even in this country of freedom of speech, if you start talking about it, then you are labeled with certain labels that, and that's the sad thing. You can't even say things. You can't even speak openly. I was talking to someone yesterday who's Christian, who's waking up to what's going on. And they were at their church, and some inappropriate things were mentioned about the situation that's going on. And they themselves felt helpless. They couldn't. They said they knew what was being said is wrong, but they couldn't say anything. And that's the condition, and this is how they control us. As they control us, they made us poor, not just financially, but spiritually, because we fear them, and they control us through this fear. And again, taqwa is to fear Allah. And again, this is the purpose of Ramadan. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with His love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May He, as well as the love of His family and companions, and may He protect and give victory to our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and may He remove those that are the oppressors. Those who have not made sunnah, go ahead and make sunnah.
Bismillah.